percentage of an amount is what we're going to look at in this video. It's split into 4 parts. We're going to start off by looking at questions using a calculator. We're then going to move on to questions without a calculator with percentages ending in 0, then percentages ending in 5 without a calculator, and then percentages ending in any number other than 0 or 5 without a calculator. So the way my videos work, I'm going to do the example on the left, which is I do. You are then going to press pause and have a go at the example on the right, which is you do. And the bottom of the slide tells you the type of example it is. So with this one, we can use a calculator. So 27% of 380. Now percentage is out of 100. So we can write this as 27 out of 100. The of becomes a times and 380. Okay, and you can just type that into your calculator. Now we can make it a little bit easier. This can just be written as a decimal. So hop the decimal out twice. So 0.27 times 380. Now all you need to do is type 0.27 times 380 onto your calculator and you get an answer of 102.6. Now hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at the example on the right. Again, percentage can be written out of 100. The of just becomes a times sign and 96. Now you can type it into your calculator like this, but I like to go a step further and just convert it to a decimal. So 13, divide that by 100 and times that by 96. Now if I type that into my calculator, I get 12.48. Now moving on, we have 6% of 132. Again, exact same thing. Percentage is out of 100. Times that by 172. Now, if you do write this as a decimal, we're going to hop the decimal twice. So when you hop the decimal twice on 6, you go from there 1, 2. So that becomes 0.06 times 172. Okay, so just taking a bit of care there. And if I type that into my calculator, I get 10.32. Again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at the example on the right. Now with this one, again, percentage is out of 100. And that just becomes 0.02 times 44. And if I do that on my calculator, I get 0.88. Here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Mark your work. Now moving on. Now we're not using a calculator. Okay, so if you have got a calculator, please put it away. This is without a calculator. So now when you're trying to find percentages without a calculator, I always recommend you start by finding 10%. So for example, in this case, 100% is 300. Okay, so that's the original amount we start with, 100%. Now the question's asked us to find 20%. So if you start by finding 10%, now to find 10%, you just divide it by 10 on each side. So if I divide each side by 10, that gives me 30 here. Now you might be wondering, well, actually the question's asked for 20 and not 10. Well, how do you go from 10% to 20? You just times it by 2. So if you now just go and times this by 2 on each side, I will get 20% is equal to 60. Okay, so always start by finding 10%, and then you can just multiply to go up. So on the right, again, hopefully you've pressed pause now to go like this. So the original amount, 400, represents 100%. Okay, now I'm going to find 10%, so I'm going to divide each side by 10. And now the question is asking for 30%. So to go to 30%, I'm just going to times each side by 3. So times this side by 3, times this side by 3. So that's 4, 8, 12. So that gives me 120. So here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Mark your work. Now moving on, we now have percentages ending in a 5. So 25% of 300. Again, exact same way to start, yeah? 100% is the original amount. 10% is 30. Now, to find 25%, you need to find 20% and 5% and add them together. So to find 20%, we can just times this by 2. So 20% will give me 60. And now to find 5%, we just need to half this. So if I half this, that becomes 5%. So I also need to half this side, which becomes 15. So in total, I have to add these together because 20 plus 5 gives me 25%. So I then need to add these two together. So that gives me 60 plus 15. And the answer is 75. Okay. So again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at the example on the right. So to find 30%, I'm going to find 10% and times it by 3, which gives me 30. So I need 30% and I need 5%. And the way I find this is I find 10% and times it by 3. So if I start off again, same way here, 100% is 400. 10% is 40. 30% is 120. Now I just need to find the remaining 5%. So I can just half this here and half this here. So if I half that, that gives me 5%. If I half that, that gives me 20. And my final answer is just a combination of these two, because 30 plus 5 gives me 35%. So I just add that, and I get my final answer, which is 120 plus 20, which is 140. Here's some practice questions. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers. Mark your work. Now, moving on, we'll be looking at different percentages. So just as a recap, well, how do you find 20%? So remember, just start with 10% and just times that by 2. To find 20%, again, start with 10%, times that by 2, that gives you 20. And now to find 5%, just half the 10%, okay? Now moving on, to find 27%, I would find 10%, times it by 2, that gives me 20. I would then half the 10% to give me 5, which gives me 25 so far. And now to find the remaining 2%, I would find 1% and times it by 2. Okay, that would give me 27% altogether. And now to find just 2%, I would just find 1% and times it by 2. Okay, this is how you need to start thinking about these. So immediately, hopefully you've pressed pause and had to go at the examples on the right. To find 40%, just find 10% times it by 4. To find 45%, again, 10% times 4, and then half the 10% to get you the 5%, and that's 45. Now to get 49, again, 10% times 4 gives you the 40, 5% gives you 45. To find the remaining 4%, find 1% and times it by 4. Okay, again, same thing here, find 1% times it by 4. Okay, so you need to start thinking of examples like this. So moving on, to find 2% of 100, so 300, so again, 100% is the original amount. Now we can go down to 10% or we can go straight down to even 1% here. I can divide this side by 100, and I can divide this side by 100, and that gives me 3. And now the question's asking for 2%, so I times this by 2, times this by 2. That gives me 2% is equal to 6. So there was no need here to go to 10%, but we could do that. We could have gone to 10 and then gone to 1. So again, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a go at the example on the right. So the original amount is 100. The question's asked for 3%, so I'll find 1%, which is 4, and then 3%, so times each side by 3, that becomes 12. Moving on, we've now been asked for 17%. Again, the way I think of 17% is I need to find 10%, then I need to find percent, and then I need to find 1% and times that by 2. Because if I add all of these together, that becomes 17. So let's start off by finding 10%. So 100% is equal to 280. So 10% is equal to 28. So that's that done. Now 5%, so if I just half that, is equal to 14. So that's that done. Now 1%, so to find 1%, it's easier to go from there to there. Or you could just go straight from here to here. You could just divide the original, divide them both by 100. That gives you 2.8. So now I need to times that by 2 because the question wants 17%. So if I times that by 2, I get 2% is 2.8 times 2, which is 5.6. So for my final answer, I will need this, this, and this, because 10 plus 5 plus 2 equals 17%. So I just add all these together. So that's 28 plus 14 plus 5.6. So if I add 28 plus 14 plus 5.6, I get 47.6 as my answer. So again, looking at the example on the right, the way I'm thinking of this is, well, I need to find 10%, 5%, and then I need the 4%, which is just 1% times 4. So again, if I start off here, well, 100% is 580. 10% is going to be 58. And now the 5% is just going to be half of that. So half of 58 is 29. And now I need to find 1%. So 1% is just going to be 5.8. So the way you can do that is either you can divide this by 10 on each side, which gives you 1, or divide this by 100 on each side, which gives you the 1%. And now I need to times that by 4 to get 4%. So if I do 5.8 times 4, I get an answer of 23.2. And so for my final answer, I need 10%, I need 5%, and I need 4%, because all of them add up to 19%. So if I now add up 58 plus 29 plus 23.2, so if we do that, we end up with an answer of 110.2. Now moving on, again, the way I think of this is 28%, so we need the 20%. I can get that from 10% times 2, that's 20. I can get 5%, which gives me 25. And to get the remaining 3, I'll just find 1% and times that by 3. Now all of that adds up to 28. So again, starting in the same way, 100% is 160, 10% is 16, and 5% is going to be 8, and then 1% is going to be 1.6. Okay, so we know we need 20%. So we know that 20% is going to be double that. So that'll be 16 times 2, which is 32. We need 3%. So 3% is just going to be 3 times 1.6, which gives us 4.8. Now, to get the final answer, we will need 3%, we need the 20%, and we need the 5, because all three of them add up to 28%. Okay, so that would be 32 plus 8 plus 4.8, and that will be our final answer, which is 44.8. Now, hopefully you've pressed pause and had a got the example on the right. So we need 30%, 5%, and 4%. So we need 10% and times that by 3. We need 5%, and then we need 1% and times that by 4. Now, you could argue we could do 1% times 9. That works as well. So we have 100% is 480. 10% is 48. 5% is half of that, which is 24. So, and then 1% is 4.8. So we need 30%. So 30% is going to be 48 times 3, which gives me 144. 5% is fine, and then here we need 4%. So we're just going to multiply 4.8 by 4, which gives me 19.2. And now for my final answer, I need 30%, 4%, and 5, because that adds up to 39. So if I do 144 plus 24 plus 19.2, so 144 plus 24 plus 19.2, that gives me 187.2 as my final answer. So here's some practice questions for you to have a go at. Press pause and have a go. Here are the answers, mark your work. Now, if you would like some more practice, I've got a full worksheet on this over on my website, linked in the comments down below. And if you found this video useful, I've got loads of other content like this over on my YouTube channel. Do check it out.